you. Hello, Melbourne. So nice to be here. Welcome to For the Love of Bubba. I'm Magdalena Ball, and we have Barbara Kamler, Ramona Koval, and Elise Esther Hearst. So can we have first a warm welcome to our guests? I would like to begin by acknowledging the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land we're on today, and to pay my respects to elders, past and present, and note their enduring connection to country, knowledge, and of course, stories, which is really what the whole festival is about. If you have a phone, can you please turn it to silent? If any of you were at the opening session last night, you will have seen when somebody's phone went off the glare of Bram Presser, and I don't want any of you to have to experience a glare like that. So please just turn them to silent. You'll still hear them buzzing in your pocket. And if you do take any photos, please tag them with hashtag MJBW2024 or hashtag Melbourne Jewish Book Week so they can be reposted. The plan is if we have time at the end, we've got a lot to get through, but if we have time at the end, I'll give you 10 minutes or so for questions. So get your question juices flowing while we're talking. And I'll say this at the end too, but all of the books that we'll be reading from and talking about today are available in the Avenue Bookshop in the Hub. And you can go and get them signed from these absolutely magnificent authors. So the way I thought we'd run today is I'll do a little bio, just a little brief one, because I could go on for a long time with these authors. But I'll do a brief bio, and then I'll get the authors to do a little bit of a reading from their latest work or from something they brought. And then I'll ask one or two questions, and then we'll open it out into a broader chat. But do please feel free to jump in as well, panel, if I ask a question and you want to add to the answer. All right, so I'm going to begin over here with Barbara Kamler on my far right. Barbara is a poet, university educator. After publishing 9 academic books and countless research essays, her heart turned to poetry, as it does. Leaving New Jersey is a memoir told in prose poetry. Love Regardless is a gallery of 14 long love portraits based on interviews but told in syllabic verses. Very interesting. Her newest collection, very new indeed, Sophie, is a narrative about Barbara's paternal grandmother, Sophie Kamler, who in 1907, at the age of 14, fled the pogroms and poverty in Poland and ventured to New York City. 1907 was actually the busiest year in Ellis Island, the biggest diaspora year, particularly for Jews migrating because of the response to the scale-up of the pogroms in the Pale of Settlement, that area, that ring-bound area for Jews in Eastern Europe. So it's a pretty significant year, pretty significant work. The book is full of photos and artifacts with a variety of voices and perspectives, including Sophie's own, which to my mind comes through in what really is a recognizable, to me, Yiddish dialect. It's a tender and powerful book, and I am actually delighted that today, effectively, is the launch. So congratulations. So Barbara, can you just begin by just reading a little bit from the book, just to give people a flavor?
Is this working? No. Yes. No, yes?
Yeah, you just have to speak slightly louder than feels comfortable.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. Sophie is made up of 47 prose vignettes. About 12 of them are my grandmother speaking directly, and the others are, from my point of view, informed by the stories of my own memory and Sophie's other grandchildren. So I'm just going to read you 2 short excerpts. The first is Sophie speaking, and I called it Sophie Finds Work. I begged my cousin Sam, please find me some work. I need something. By that time, I was maybe 15. He had a friend on Barnett Street, a Mr. Cohn, with a shop that made feather boas. Maybe he could teach you, he says. So Sam struck a deal with the man. 4 weeks, my cousin will work for nothing. I guarantee you that. You don't pay her nothing. But she's smart. Treat her right. Teach her the trade. 4 weeks, I worked very hard. I walked from Bond Street and the Bowery all the way to the river each day, and I learned. When the 4 weeks were up, I said, Mr. Cohn, from today, I'll do piecework like the other girls for a wage. He screamed, you greenhorn? You're telling me you want pay? You can work, but I won't give you a cent. You don't know the trade yet. I knew the trade. Believe me, I knew better than the girls he paid, but I didn't say nothing to him, and I didn't want to complain to Sam. Next day, I was at Label's house, my father's brother. You know, I often went back and forth between Sam and Label. They knew it was bad with my father. They took me in. At Label's, I saw an ad, London Feather Company, Kent Street and Broadway, experienced ostrich feather sewers wanted. Ich bin nicht gewesen a sewer. I was never a sewer. What did I know? I learned to sew 6 inches for the boas at Cohn's, but the ostrich feather for the hat needs 36 inches. I thought to myself, I'll go anyway. A nice young man at the company asked me, so, where did you work before? I thought if I gave Cohn's name, it would be trouble for me. So I remembered swinging in the park on Cambridge Road in London when I was a girl. I went to public school there till the 5th grade. That's where I learned to speak English. So I told him, Cambridge Road. He frowned and he smiled. There's no factory there for ostrich feathers. It's a little place, quite unknown, I said. But we made good stuff. He looked me up and down and smiled. Hat mich angekickt. He sees how I'm dressed, a schlepper, rags for clothes, no coat. I had nothing. My English not so good, but I remember his words. I like your nerve to tell me in Cambridge Road there's a factory. I like your nerve. Here's a feather to make up. If you do it right, I'll give you a place. A nice Irish lady took me to a private office. She took apart all the pieces and said, now begin. I started to scrape the feather and she smiled. She knew I didn't know how. You look like a smart girl, she said. I'll make that feather up for you and you say you did it. Come back tomorrow, mind your business, don't speak to nobody, ask for me. I'm sure you'll learn quickly. That's the feather she showed to the man. Such luck I had that day. Next morning, I returned and she taught me. Do this, do that, put it together, that's how. I did it right. She said, it's wonderful. That first week, I made $8. Can you imagine? By me, it was $8,000. When my father heard I'm earning, he wanted to take me home right away. Gonif. But Sam threw him out. Get out of this house before I hit you, he said. You leave Sophie alone. He protected me.
Thank you. You want to keep going?
Yeah, I'm just going to read a very short one from my voice. It's called Nana's Breasts. I rarely slept at Nana's apartment, but one Saturday night remains vivid. Her bedroom at Ivy Hill had 2 twin beds, separated by a bedside table with a frilly lamp. I was already tucked in, lamplight low, and Nana entered to undress. She was a solid woman, short, stout. As she undressed, I tried not to look, but was mesmerized by the bone corset, cinching her waist, girding her breasts. Barbara, help me unlace. Undo the knot at the top. Slowly, I pulled the laces, uncertain how to proceed as I moved down her back, eyelet by eyelet, until she said, enough, I can finish. Nothing prepared me for the tumult of flesh. 2 bell-shaped pendulums, long and heavy, falling downward past her waist. My mother had an ample bosom, but I'd never seen anything like this. I wasn't certain where to look, but when Nana turned her back to don her nightie, I was lost in my pillow, embarrassed by the amplitude of her body. Somehow that revelation of womanhood was more than my 10-year-old self could handle. Yet now, in my late 70s, I'm struck by the force required to keep Nana's body together, laced in tight. Others before me have offered a feminist critique of the corset as an instrument of torture, a patriarchal symbol of women's oppression, discomfort, and subordination. But I wonder if this tough woman, once a lone child traveler, donned the corset as armor. protecting her from harm, holding her tight and upright so she might keep going, no matter what. An exoskeleton, as strong as her will to survive and stronger than the anguish buried inside.
So firstly, you can see what I mean about the Yiddish flavor of your grandmother's voice. And I love the way you work the personal yourself and the historical of your grandmother. You weave them together, these multiple voices. At one point in the book, you talk about the palimpsest, how you find yourself through your grandmother. And I think reading those two passages, we can really see that. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about that connection between this person, your grandmother, and yourself, and how by interrogating one you find the other, that link, that palimpsest.
I don't know what they were called, but my image of the palimpsest is, I used to have a writing slate. It had kind of like a waxy back and a plastic cover, so you would write on it, and then you'd lift it up, and it would the writing would disappear, so it looked like it was a clean sheet. And yet behind, in the waxed thing, is the imprint of what you wrote, and that's kind of how I think about her story. And I was totally ignorant of it until 1982. I was 35. My mother had died at a young age. I was quite bereft and was so sad I hadn't asked my mother stories. And so I went to see Sophie, and I said, I never listened properly to your story, tell me, and put on a tape recorder. And she talked for about 2 hours, and I totally exhausted her. But I was really shocked in that interaction to, first of all, realize that I had left Australia, 10 years earlier. She had left Poland, and she would say to me, you should come home. Nobody should be so alone. I know what I'm talking. And I began to see parallels between, my insistence to stay in Australia, and her desire to go, and there just seemed to be, a connection that I really never understood until then, and I think through the writing, particularly, I wanted to write about this for the last 40 years. I've had the interview, but I think now I felt, and I found more, I suppose, through the writing.
And what a wonderful thing that you did interview her while she was alive. I mean, it's one of the tragedies of life, and I think we all experience this, that we often aren't interested until it's too late. Then you can't ask the questions. You realize, you understand some of the, the off-putting or the not wanting to talk about it.
And I think because I realized I hadn't asked my mother, I was just... my mother's mother died when she was quite young, so she seemed to be the person I needed to talk to. So.
Yes. So one more question, and that is, you've said at one point no story is singular, and I think that reflects the way in which you structure the book with many different voices to make up that life. But I wonder if you can talk more about the collective nature of this Sophie you've created.
She was a very tough woman, She was courageous. She made that journey earlier. She came to New York on her own with her younger brother. She earned enough money to bring her mother and 7 siblings to America. And she was not your, squishy, soft, oh, I love being with you, Nana. My father had a very vexed relationship with her, and so, we were probably the most distant grandchildren to her of the family. And so I just felt I couldn't tell it from one point of view, and so I ended up interviewing all her other grandchildren. The eldest had the strongest sense of her because she was young when they were young, and one cousin in particular lived with her, and so I interviewed them, and then I had her speaking, and I had a whole bunch of other stories of other people speaking, and I had no idea how to put it together, but eventually found a way to do it. But I think having the multiple voices, can create a more complex picture.
And perhaps that's how we all are, right? Yeah. We're all collectives in some way or another, right?
Yeah.
All right, Ramona Koval, writer, journalist, long career on the ABC, Drive Time, of course, the book show. and has written many, many books. I'm not going to list them all, or we'd have the whole 40 minutes listing them, but the latest one is A Letter to Layla, travels to our deep past and near future, and many essays, including essays related to the topic of this conversation. There's Goodbye and Good Luck, which appeared in our own Lee Kaufman's Split collection, and also For What Has Been and What Will Be, which appeared in Helen Elliott's, edited by Helen Elliott's grandmother. And she is an honorary fellow in the Department of Communication and Creative Arts at Deakin. I could probably go on and on and on, but I'll stop there. Ramona, can I get you to read a little bit for us?
Thank you very much. So I've edited down a version of For What Has Been and What Will Be. A woman holding a scalpel dives into the wine-dark waters off the Sardinian island of Sant'Antioco. She swims to the secluded seagrass beds, home of the endangered Mediterranean clam, Pinna nobilis. Here, early in the morning, by the light of late spring's full moon, she collects the byssus, or sea silk, produced by the clam's byssus gland, keratin threads that anchor the shell to the rocks. At this time of year, the mud of the lagoon is soft. She can extract the animal, cut the byssus filaments, and replace the clam without damaging it. After 100 dives, she's gathered only 30 grams of byssus. Back in her studio, she removes the sea sediment with a carding comb and rinses the fibres in fresh water. Then she spins them into silky thread, finer than that of silkworms, a third the width of a human hair, chanting melodies taught to her by her grandmother, intoning prayers in a mixture of Sardo, the ancient Sardinian dialect, and Hebrew. She prays for what has been and what will be. Watching her on my computer screen, I recognize the Hebrew words, Elohim and Adonai, two of the names given to the God of Moses. She dyes the strands in secret concoctions of lemon juice, spices, and varieties of seaweed. The fibers soon become elastic and shimmer in the sunlight like threads of gold. Now in her 60s, Chiara Vigo claims she is the last woman alive who knows the secrets of working byssus, secrets that are whispered, never written, entrusted from woman to woman, the daughters and granddaughters in her family for 24 generations. She remembers her grandmother teaching her, age 3, to dive. Her surname reveals her family to be from Spain or Liguria. Local Sardinians were not sailors, but shepherds, afraid of the sea, which for them was the portal for invasions from abroad, Phoenicians, Arabs, and Catalans. Many had never seen the sea, much less learned to swim. According to the sea oath she is bound by, the precious byssus, like the sun or the tides or the flight of an eagle, can never be bought or sold. There is a sign on the door of her studio, the Museo del Bisso, haste doesn't live here. Vigo embroiders the byssus thread onto pieces of fabric or braids bracelets as gifts for those who seek her help. Byssus is said to bring both good fortune and fertility. Her work is displayed in the Louvre, the Vatican, and the British Museum. By 12, Vigo knew how to weave, but who will collect and spin the fine silk when she is gone? Her daughter lives in Dublin, and in 2017 told the BBC, "My mother and I are very different. People have always told me that I'd be a fool to allow this art to die, but I'm desperately torn. My life is mine." Might there be no more mermaid silk for the coming generations? We have our own miraculous man-made fibres now, and cheaper and more efficient ways to manufacture threads that look golden. So why does it seem such a pity to allow the hidden knowledge of byssus, the word itself sounds like a whispered prayer, to fade and die? How I long to be a granddaughter in a long line of granddaughters like Chiara Vigo, learning secret chants from my grandmother, and when the day came, teaching them to my own grandchildren. But fate had delivered me to a mother who was a Holocaust survivor, the only one out of her large Polish-Jewish family. Here I was at the bottom of the world, a child with no grandparents, At special school assemblies when grandparents filled the rows, I sang for nobody. Old people remained a mystery. At 51, I became a grandmother. With no fond memories of being grandmothered, I was free to create my own role. I knew about making good food and offering fresh, warm beds and endless kisses, but who should I be? Certainly not a silly old woman fooled by the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood. My 6 grandchildren call me Bubba, our Yiddish word linguistically related to the Slavic Baba, and through this to the story of Baba Yaga, the mythic grandmother witch. She lived in a cottage built upon outsized chicken's feet and surrounded by a fence made from human bones, the result of her penchant for cooking and eating people who displeased her. But some stories tell of her offering guidance to those who approached her with openness and honesty. Connected to the supernatural power of the underworld, she was eternally wise, knowing the medicinal secrets of plants and potions, and flying in a magic mortar, the pestle, a rudder. Could I have the courage and wisdom of Baba Yaga without her ghoulish streak? And what help to our grandchildren is the sentimental mystery of Bissus and other ancient songs. Chiara Vigo prays for what has been and what will be. Prayer? We now need to do more than pray. In these worrying days, we can tell our stories of what will be with so much more data, and we can encourage and model urgent action beyond the whispered secrets and the confines of the hearth and home. And anyway, is Chiara Vigo really the last woman alive who holds the secret of Bissus? A deeper investigation into the mysteries of Sant'Antioco reveals a rival sea silk collective. The sisters Assuntina and Giuseppina Pes learnt the secrets from Efficia Moroni, who herself was instructed by Italo Diana in a school for weaving that opened on the island in 1923. In 2013, the Pes sisters ran a Bissus workshop and explained every step of the process to the participants. There were no chants, promises and obligations here, but there was documentation which was presented to a conference organised in the Italian town of Lecce by the Centre for Textile Research at the University of Copenhagen. In 2016, the local municipality closed Chiara Vigo's Museo del Biso because of non-compliant electrical installations. She claims they were forcing her to charge entrance fees and to write down my secrets. She says she now wants to live overseas. I am a little sorry to ruin a perfectly enchanting story. We are readily seduced by the hushed prayers, the diving by moonlight, the golden threads. But now, more than anything, we need to convey to our grandchildren our lived wisdom, together with our courage, and most of all our fighting spirit, as we take flight in our magic mortars, wielding our pestles as rudders. We are all Baba Yaga now.
Wonderful, thank you. And you can actually look up Bissus and see what it looks like. It's quite interesting looking.
I didn't make it up.
I
It's
did
all
know.
true.
No, it's true. True
I
story.
write non-fiction.
That's right. You wrote to me before the session and said you were a bit of a wild card because, as you read in that, you didn't know your grandmother. But I wonder if we ever really know anyone, beyond what we begin to explore from within ourselves, and we carry something that is recognizable, whether it's the DNA of them that you carry or whether it's, what you sense and what you feel when you are grandmothering your own children. There's some kind of inheritance.
Oh, no. No, I can't agree. How lucky you were to see your grandmother
That's true.
stripping off at night. And what you learned from her body and, the smell and the dark. And I would have loved to have had that. And my DNA doesn't do that for me at all. No, I really didn't know what to be as I'm sure there are people here who know, no grandparents, no cousins, no aunts, no uncles, and in a very unhappy family. There was me and my sister and the parents. And, when you become a grandparent, then what are you supposed to do? Who are you supposed to be? So you have to kind of invent it yourself. what would I have liked? You know, it might be not what they want, but anyway, this is what they've got. So, yes, no, I think there's nothing like knowing people. I mean, of course, we never know what anybody else is thinking, even our most intimate, even the men we live with and now the children we have and our grandchildren and our best friends. You can never know what's inside their minds, and that's why we have fiction, because fiction writers can tell us.
Yes,
what
I
we
guess, or
can't
intuit
know.
your way in.
Yeah.
But you know, is there not a sense through your mother, for example, that you know there's something there that I don't know, something carried? I feel it in my own family. This, you know, what I know through my mother is something from my grandmother.
Well, my mother was another story.
Yes,
So.
fair enough.
Ananda Amaisa, completely. No, I had to be a bit self-made from my story.
Yes.
Yes, but one can imagine and one can put stories together. I mean, you're really lucky that you have these documentations, you know, because when you come out of the sort of background that I had, there was fire and ashes, and it was very hard to document things. And then you have lies, and you have avoidances, and you have people who can't talk about their past, and you have tears, and you have trauma, and you have broken people. So that's what you have to work with, but you have to work with what you have to work with, and you have to make something of it.
Yes. Well, you say at one point in your writing, you know, that you're driven by this, you know, deep curiosity, this desire to fill gaps. And I guess you have gaps. I mean, that in itself is something, right? The gaps are what drives you.
That's what I think I probably became a professional question asker because I had so many questions about absolutely everything, from what you're supposed to do at kindergarten, what you're supposed to do at school, you know, how you're supposed to interpret every body language bit of people who weren't talking. So yes, I fell into the right place.
Yes. In Letter to Layla, there is this sense of wanting to connect perhaps the personal with, you know, the much broader picture of mankind and the earth and the world. And I wonder if that's not also driven by this sense of wanting to see yourself as, you know, I'll bring up the theme, belonging, as being part of something broader.
Well, in that book, I was interested in how we became what we are now and then what might happen to us in the future as a species. And Layla is my youngest granddaughter. She's now 9. And my children work, and I worked at home as a writer, so of course there's always children there, there's always sick children, there's all kinds of children. And Layla was in a bassinet at my feet, and then I realised that I had this Homo sapiens who was a perfect study. And I realised, I know it's only one, and I hadn't paid attention much when my children were little, because I was working and trying to keep a roof over their heads. But with this little baby, I thought, I can observe very closely, so I can tell the story of the beginnings of speech and the beginnings of pointing, and contrast that to what chimps do, because they don't point like that, like babies do. So all kinds of things about the human child and development and us. How do we know anything, and how do we use the knowledge, and we're so tribal. And so yes, from the particular to the general is my thing.
Yes, and now Layla has so much more than a baby book.
Yeah, the others are really pissed off though. I've got 5 other grandchildren, and they're saying, well, when are we getting a letter to Jessie and a letter to Jessie?
You can tell effectively it's all of them. They might not buy that though.
No, they don't buy it.
Yeah, all right. Elise Esther Hearst. And I joked with Elise that I now had to quickly modify her bio and add to award-winning playwright, author, and performer, singer, if anybody heard her last night. Magnificent. Her debut novel, which is sitting right there, One Day We're All Going to Die, was published in 2023, shortlisted for the Age Book of the Year Award, and her theatre work has appeared in various theatres around Australia, including A Very Jewish Christmas Carol, and Yentl, which won the Green Room Award for Outstanding Writing in 2023. And I'm so excited that I have tickets to see it in Sydney at the Opera House this year. It is coming to New South Wales. So Elise, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Can I get you to read a little bit?
Sure. It starts with Cookie, and in this book, Cookie is the character Naomi's grandmother. Cookie was rifling through a plastic bag full of material. Sorry, they're at the Jewish Museum. It was a recent donation of fabric samples from a clothing factory that had closed its doors long ago. I placed the tea next to her and said, "You found the schmutters. You should be wearing gloves." "What? Don't be ridiculous," said Cookie. "They're just schmutters." Cookie pulled one of the pieces of fabric out. It had a pattern of green and white diamonds. Clipped to it was a piece of paper. "Emma Greenblatt," she read aloud. "She was from Łódź," I said. "Maybe you know her." "Do you know how many people were from Łódź?" "No, neither do I, but it was a lot." "No, I don't know an Emma Greenblatt. Did she work in the lane?" Cookie leaned back in Josh's chair, fondling the fabric swatch in a reverie. I needed to sort through the bag and caption each item. It was another job piling up on my desk. I had already begun writing the label for this particular piece of fabric. Emma Greenblatt was a survivor of the Łódź ghetto and Auschwitz. She left Poland in 1949 and arrived in Melbourne in 1950. Emma soon found work in the local textile trade in Flinders Lane. It was the part of the job I revelled in, researching the stories behind the objects, crafting a narrative, giving names to things that had been nameless. Ever since I'd started working at the museum, Josh had delegated almost all of the captioning to me, and I was glad for it. "She died about 20 years ago," I said. "Oh, poor girl." Cookie heaved a heavy sigh and handed back the fabric swatch. "It's funny seeing you here, in among all these old things. It doesn't make sense that you are the keeper of all the old things." "I like old things." "Even me." "Especially you, Cookie. You've always been a strange girl." Cookie wiped the corners of her mouth with an arthritic finger that bent slightly the wrong way. "You suddenly seem all grown up." "Huh." I looked at my computer screen, which had gone dark. I tapped the keyboard to refresh it. I don't feel very grown up." "Well, I don't feel grown up either." Cookie narrowed her eyes. "No, show me something on that thing." "On the computer?" She nodded. I scrolled through the Sephardic object collection. She yawned while I pointed out the intricacies of a Havdalah spice box from Yemen. Some people fill it with rosemary, cloves, cinnamon. It felt oddly disappointing describing the spices to her. Cookie rubbed her hands together for warmth and looked out the window. I passed her the cup of tea and she sipped it, slurped it until it was gone. She handed me the empty cup. Her gaze shifted back to the window outside, the weeds attached to the drain pipe of the next-door building. After some time, I said, "Would you like to see something else?" "Yes," she said, turning back to me and startling me with her enthusiasm. I brought up one of Paula's photographs, one of the bathroom shots. Cookie leaned in and studied the photo with a furrowed brow. "Do you like it?" I asked, feeling my cheeks becoming warm. Cookie thought about it and shrugged. "She looks miserable." I looked more closely at the picture. "Does she? Why do you like this sad stuff?" "Because life is sad?" Cookie hit the air. "Not your life." "No, I guess not," I said. "People want happy things, like babies. You should make a show about babies or puppies." "I want to make a show about her." "Okay, sure. What do I know?" A calendar invite appeared over the top of the image. It was from Josh. It just read meeting, 4:30 p.m. "What does that say?" Cookie leaned forward, trying to read the notification. I felt a sudden urge for the toilet, put my hand to my stomach and scanned my desk for water. I managed to knock a mug onto the floor, shattering it. It was from the museum shop and I still hadn't paid for it. Shit, I stuttered, bending down to collect the remains. "What's wrong with you?" My eyes started to get hot. "What do you mean?" "You've been avoiding me." "No, I haven't." "You haven't come to visit for 2 months." 2 months? Was that how long it had been? I looked at the date on the top right-hand corner of my screen. It was almost 2 months since we'd been to the conference. It had been the longest and shortest 2 months of my life. "I've been busy. I've seen you at Shabbat." "You're skinny." "I'm normal." "What's he done to you?" "Who?" "I don't know who. I just know you're not my Naomi. So is there a he?" "Kind of." "Ha!" Cookie banged her fist on my desk, which startled us both. Well, kind of doesn't sound like much of anything. Kind of sounds like a waste of time. You don't want to be in a kind of situation, do you? No? No, you don't. Trust me. I took the remaining fabric swatches out of the bag and tried to iron out the wrinkles with my fingers. Cookie grabbed some and started doing the same. For a time, we sat in silence, hypnotically tracing diamonds and squares, once fit for gowns and party dresses.
And Cookie has to be one of the great fictional grandmothers. I think she opens the book with, you have to just read that line. I mean, I can read it if you want. Your mother was murdered.
Your mother was
and
murdered and now she's dead, darling.
Yes.
That's what I said to her.
Yes, I think we all know a Cookie. But you devote the book to your own grandmother, Maria Calm, and you have this, it's very compacted, but you have this beautiful dedication that is, without her, nothing. Very simple, very brief. And yet, you know, it seems almost a truism, but it seems at the heart of all of our work, really, this sudden, strange realization that, you know, we owe our lives even to the murdered grandmothers. You know, if they hadn't, our existence is predicated on them.
That's right.
And I thought about this, you know, in decisions that they've made. You know, do they go left or do they go right? And, you know, or do they have a child or not a child? And all those decisions kind of are part of, you know, why we're here. So it's an extraordinary quotation, really, for something so brief.
Yeah, well, I guess it's, you know, I feel like my formative, you know, being and knowledge comes through Maria. She is the only grandmother that I knew. And really, you know, the matriarch of the family, but also you know, the men in her life had proven to be disappointing and difficult. And my step grandfather died. I was in grade 4, and then from that time onwards, it was, you know, the only grandparent, the only grandmother. It was Bubby, and so she really was. You know, the family story was with her and with how we came to be in this place. And I think, you know, as being that kind of sensitive, creative child, I just, you know, latched onto her and her story, and it's informed so much of my work and just my being.
Yes, Elisheva Scroogeovich, for example.
Yeah.
Elisheva, yes, sorry. And she's known for her Bubby's famous, you know, gingerbread.
Yes.
So I wanted to just talk a little bit, and then I'll bring Ramona into this too, about, and maybe Barbara too, because this isn't all the work about the importance of these handed-down recipes about food and that relationship between the food and tradition.
Yeah, with A Very Jewish Christmas Carol, when I was developing it was an adaptation of A Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens, and so it was kind of like putting all these pieces together, and so the Scrooge character became Elisheva Scroogeovich, and and the ghost, Marley's ghost, became the ghost of her grandmother, Bubby, who was a Holocaust survivor and had run an extraordinary bakery that was famous for its gingerbread at Christmas time, but her granddaughter had, since her death, had subsequently run the bakery into the ground. And it was, you know, so much about what is lost when things are not recorded, and when we deny aspects of ourselves and of our past.
Yeah, wonderful. Is there anything either of you want to add about food?
I would.
Yes.
Sophie loved by feeding. When I interviewed all of her other grandchildren, almost every story was, you know, she taught me how to make chopped liver. I remember the carp that she had swimming in the bathtub before she made the filter fish. You know, everybody had a story. My sister had a story about how Sophie took her to the beach. She got a splinter in her foot. Sophie took her home and stuffed her mouth with grapes as she pulled out the splinter. My sister says, well, it worked, and I've never eaten a grape since.
It's such a
It's
you know,
all
an
around,
important part
all around.
of-
And
of
I guess I
culture.
have inherited the love by feeding. I mean,
I wrote a Jewish cookbook once because I needed a car, and I had a universal joint fell out of my third-hand car. I don't know if you know about universal joints. They hold the car together. That's why they're called universal, it turns out. But my mother had died a long, long time before that, and so I interviewed other people's mothers about their important recipes. So also because my mother didn't talk very much, but if she was cooking and we were in the kitchen helping, then we could ask her questions. And she would be pinned a bit. She wouldn't be able to avoid it because she had to be there. So, especially for baking things and pastry. So I knew that people cooking together was a moment that you could actually have conversations. So I went to people's houses, I cooked with them, and I recorded their conversations, and I created a cookbook. So that's my story.
Yeah.
But they always want a triple layer chocolate mocha Laker for their birthdays, and then they get to choose the outside, and then they decorate it, and that's what's been going on for all of these years. So I start my own traditions. That's what's good about being an Bubba.
That's wonderful, wonderful. I think we might have time for one question, but I will just say that, I feel like the food is almost like a kind of visceral storytelling. It tells its own story in a different way to words that's handed down. All right, if you don't, I have plenty more, but just, yes, we have a question over here. Just nice and loud.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question about food, so I'm glad that you answered that. But my question is, do you think the things you have talked about applies outside of the Jewish community? Do you think there are bubbas in the same style in other? I mean,
Yes.
there are. But I just wanted to know from your perspective, what do you think makes specifically a Jewish grandmother so bubbery?
You ask a Greek about his grandmother, you ask an Italian about their grandmothers, you ask in Chinese, same deal. We're all human. This is what we do.
But maybe it is these old wisdoms, and you write about this, Ramona. Not only old crafts, but old wisdoms that are handed down. I mean, there are, I guess, cultural traditions that the grandmothers become in many ways the custodians of. And these old wisdoms, though, they seem to me. I think at one point, Ramona, you say, we need new wisdoms now. But I feel like in many ways it might be the old wisdoms that save us. These old ways of doing things, these going back to homesteading, going back to, the kind of well-being as a way of measuring, our progress or our the Earth's health. I don't know. Any other comments about what makes for a Jewish grandmother?
I think we might have said it.
That's true, the chutzpah that Barbara, you were speaking about in your book about your grandmother's chutzpah, just to get the work and put herself forward.
Yeah. She was a very direct woman, and she there's a vignette about her. She's interacting with her gay brother, who disappeared and no one ever knew why. And on that day when I interviewed her, he came into the room because he was kind of taking care of it at the time, and she said, "Are you still with that fat man?" And it was kind of like, so she knew, everybody in the family knew, nobody said, and there was no sugarcoating her. So I guess I've tried through the multiple different ways of looking at her to kind of keep that edge, you know, which was tough. You know, I didn't seek her out as a child, only later.
Kvetching and kvelling.
Kvetching.
That's what makes Jewish grandmother to me. All right, are we out of time now? Are we done?
Yeah.
Can we get one more question? Okay, one more question. Lucky, first hand up. Anybody? No? Okay, well then I will ask one more question. Maybe everybody can just say one or two words or sentences about the joy of grandmothering, because it seems to me also, even in the midst of the trauma, a sense, and Barbara, you write about it, I think everybody writes about the fact that there is, I know you haven't been a grandmother yet, but you know, as a granddaughter,
I'm a mother. You've
written about
my
grandmothers.
children.
Yeah. There's a sense that there is a certain kind of, I guess, freedom that comes along with grandmothering. You no longer feel that, I guess, the terror that comes with mothering. You're free to just give. Does that sound right? Does everybody,
Yeah.
Barbara, do you want to start?
Well, I have spent many years, although not at present, because my grandchildren are too old and would rather be with their friends, now mostly. But, what was I going to say? I've lost it. Joy. Yeah. So for me, the joy was just having time with them, and time not as exhausted as I used to be when I was working, and not saying later, but now. And yes, I've made it my business to always say yes. And that's an enormous pleasure, really. Not qualified, not put off, very present, and unobserved by other adults. Time with them has been just, and continues to be, fantastic.
And I would add to that, because I agree with that, but I would add to that, they ask you direct questions and you can give direct answers. You know, will I ever find love? And then you can address it, that sort of question. And, you know, what did you do when what was the worst thing you did? And I can tell them. And because their mothers aren't around to censor me, which they will do if they were.
Correct.
So that's the freedom.
Yes.
I think I'm not a grandmother, but I felt that special relationship with my grandmother is partly in fact to that like propulsion to need to live and move forward. And it was so clear to me that for my grandmother, family was everything. That was her religion. That was, you know, her way of living was through family and for family and for the future. And you know, she was so resilient, strong, out of necessity, and I don't know if it's particular to Jewish grandmothers or, you know, women who had to make incredibly tough decisions under immense amount of pressure, which is just about surviving and also thriving. But just for my grandmother, she was so funny and so joyful and just adored her grandchildren. And I think in that kind of unfettered way, where it was much more complex for, you know, my mum and my uncle, who had to kind of navigate that weight of expectation, which I didn't, you know, she was just so pure love and joy for her grandchildren. So I had that gift.
Wonderful. I think that's a great place to end. So please put a hand. And let me just say, all the books of these wonderful people, including the recently launched Sophie, are available in the bookshop, the Avenue Bookshop, in the hub. Please head over there. The authors will sign them for you, so take advantage of that. They are all magnificent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.